Hello everyone, I'm Steph, I'm Head of Programming and Literary at the Almeida Theatre, and I'm here with Booker Prize winning novelist Alan Hollinghurst, author of The Line of Beauty, among other novels, and most recently Our Evenings, which is fairly recently out in paperback, and Jack Holden, writer of Cruise and Kenrex, and also the adapter of this version of The Line of Beauty. And we're just going to have a bit of a chat about the experience of revisiting The Line of Beauty now in 2025 and reimagining it for the stage here. We're just going to have a bit of a conversation, and then I'll give some opportunity for you to ask any questions that you like, and then hopefully some of you are coming to see the show later on this evening. So I thought I would start with Alan. I'm sure you've answered this many times, but just taking you back to first writing the novel, and just be interested to know where that idea originally sort of came from for you.
Yes, insofar as I can remember. I was thinking of the book as a kind of delayed reaction, in a way. And I moved to London myself sort of 2 years before this novel starts, which is in 1983. I lived, first of all, with a much more humble friend in a little attic apartment in Notting Hill. And I used to walk every day to the Kensington New pools down Kensington Park Gardens, and wondered about who lived in these grand houses. They weren't actually quite as grand then as they are now, but the whole of Notting Hill has sort of gone up and up, and it was surprisingly shabby, a lot of it. And that was obviously a tumultuous decade with the triumph of Thatcherism and the coming of AIDS. And these were things which I think at the time I didn't know how to write about. And there was quite a lot of, I felt there was a certain pressure on me as a gay writer to sort of tackle the AIDS question, but I couldn't see a satisfactory way really of doing it at the time. And I think I just needed time to pass so that I could look back on the whole period and sort of integrate, or attempt to integrate into a narrative these sort of different elements of it. So the book obviously came out about 20 years after the events that it's describing, and now we're another 20 years ahead. So it's rather nice having these cycles. I felt that those years were sort of terrible ones in almost every respect. And living in London, you had a very sort of vivid ongoing demonstration of these huge social changes that were going on, and this sort of immense creation of wealth and new poverty and homelessness, and then of course the AIDS crisis, which affected me very personally with the loss of close friends and so forth. It was a question of how to tackle it, and I knew I didn't want to write something which was just a sort of head-on assault on the idea of Thatcherism. I wanted to do something rather more subtle, I think. And I thought the idea that you might take an innocent young man who was rather glamorized for various reasons by the world of these sort of high Tory people. He's an innocent who goes into this world, and then to see him progressively corrupted by that world and then disillusioned by it. And that seemed to be quite an interesting way of approaching the material.
Thank you. And Jack, because you came to us with the idea of the proposal to adapt The Line of Beauty, so I'm interested in, when you read Alan's novel, what was it in the novel that made you imagine it for the stage? What was exciting about it in a dramatic form?
Well, the first of Alan's novels that I read was The Swimming Pool Library, which blew my mind, and did lots of things to me, actually. And then my dad used to run a second-hand bookshop, and I was in there one day and saw another title by Alan Hollinghurst, and it was The Line of Beauty. And I think my dad was going to charge me £3 for it, but he gave it to me for free. And then I read it, and that sort of was a whole other level of literature and beauty, and I was floored by it. But that was quite a few years ago, and then I was swimming in the men's ponds in Highgate, which is the start of every good story, and I with a friend, and we were talking about the line of beauty because much of it takes place there, obviously. And we wondered why nobody had staged it. And we then wondered if it's unstageable. And I thought, well, I'll give it a go anyway, if the rights are available and if a theatre would say yes. And both of those things, made it so. And then really I started thinking about, okay, actually, now how do we do this? And I think the main challenge was structural, because the book is divided into 3 very distinct parts. But in an evening at the theatre, obviously you have 2 parts, and that doesn't mean you necessarily have to stick in 2 time zones. We definitely jump through lots of time. So once I'd sorted that out, then it was really a curation of all my best bits from the book, really. Not all of them, because that would be a very long evening. I had to choose what my version of events would be, what my thread through the story would be. And I knew that I wanted one scene in particular to end the first half. It's sort of the iconic vignette of the whole book, really. And I suppose I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't spoil it.
Yes, are we allowed to talk about what happens?
Yeah, I don't know. Who's seen it? Who is seeing it? You see, it's an even split. We can't do that. Yeah.
No, I think let's keep it as a surprise. You can talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. We'll try.
Yeah. And was it the structural thing? Because I'm interested. You said when you talked to your friend about it being unstageable, what was that you were thinking was potentially unstageable?
Well, at first glance, it's a 500-page novel. It's incredibly well peopled with characters that come and go. It spans almost the entire decade. Characters develop, therefore, in such a huge way, or don't, as the case may be with many of them. So there's just a lot to pack in. So and therefore you have to. The task of adaptation is mainly subtraction, is cutting away and away and away, and then presenting a 180-page first draft to you, and you saying, unacceptable, cut more, and then Michael Grandage saying, I won't read it if it's this length, so cutting even more, and then doing a table read of it, and again realising it's still far too long, and every stage thinking, but how can I cut more? I've cut it to the bone. And then realising actually there is more. And it's not just about, random arbitrary cutting. It's about actually taking a bit away there allows this bit to sing even more. And Alan's beautiful prose and interiority from the novel, not much of it makes it to the stage. Directly. But the actors who have read and love the book bring all of that wonderful interiority in 3 dimensions. So it's a give and take.
And I think sometimes one of the things I feel, because I do often suggest people cut, that is one of my jobs.
Yeah.
And I do think sometimes when you cut, particularly if you cut within a line, often the bit that you have taken out, the subtext of that remains.
Yeah.
Sometimes writers kind of overwrite, and then what you take out is actually carried in subtext or performance, which are the sort of other tools that you have as actors. And I know you sort of talked together a little bit about the process of, doing the adaptation, but also the cutting and what to keep and what to remove. And Alan, were there things that you felt were the sort of essence of the novel that were really important for you to maintain in a stage production that felt, crucial to sort of be reimagined?
I don't think I expressed any feelings about that to Jack. My approach from the start was, I think, quite a sensible, grown-up one. I can't be sort of trying to exercise that kind of control over it. This is something which is moving from the page into a completely different medium, which has its own rules, which fascinate me, but I don't really understand them. I wouldn't know how to do it myself. So I had complete confidence, really, in Jack's doing that and finding. I mean, I think one of the things that I'd, having read perhaps 4 successive versions of this ever dwindling script, was you're really ever more clearly seeing what the key things were that you wanted to emphasise. And so we did perhaps talk a little bit about things in the book, such as young Nick, the protagonist's preoccupation with beauty and making that understood on stage as a central sort of tenet of his personality and behaviour. And you did some rather beautiful things, actually, just to sort of to bring that out in a new way, whilst other things which weren't so important were lost.
Yeah, I think you were very useful when it came to because in the process of the adaptation, I'd sometimes blend characters together, amalgamate characters, and at one point I maybe amalgamated about 15 characters into one, and Alan quite rightly pointed out that it sounds like a monster of a character.
There was a certain Frankensteinian sort of element to it. I mean, there is one character who amalgamates 6 really horrible characters in the book into one tremendous.
Yeah.
But you rationalised, you
exactly,
harmonised
smoothing it out. Yeah. And Alan also gave me some great. It was very exciting, actually. He was very, very gracious and let me get on with it. And then just towards the end, corrected my French, which was it was actually a thrill to have my homework marked by Alan Hollinghurst.
I mean, I do think when I think about adaptation, I think to me that's one of the most exciting things, is that it's a sort of conversation between 2 unique artistic voices. You have the voice of the original novel, and then you have voice and adapting playwright. And I do think the best version is where both of those voices kind of you can hear in the piece, which I definitely think is true in this version. And I was interested in what you were saying about, obviously, Nick as a protagonist, and I think one of the really compelling things about the novel is that character and the interiority of being so close to him. And this character, as you say, Alan, is sort of someone who gets taken into these worlds and is somewhat a sort of very astute observer and narrator, and you're getting all of their thoughts. And that feels like quite a novelistic character, maybe not a traditionally dramatic character, in terms of sort of some things like agency and decision making. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit more about some decisions you made in sort of translating a novelistic protagonist into sort of more of a dramatic hero in some senses, or a dramatic character.
Yeah, I suppose. That's always been the challenge with with a character like Nick. Is he is sort of like a David Copperfield or Dickensian kind of boy character. He's very much the neutral and centre around which all of these big, larger-than-life characters orbit and pull them in different directions. But exactly that, the beauty of the novel is that he is mercurial and kind of dances his way through the 80s. And I suppose I wanted to honour that because that's the truth of the book, but I also did have to put in a bit more architecture about him being slightly more active in his decisions. Not so much so that it changed the kind of moral lesson of the piece, but I think it was all there in the book. It was just quite crudely extruding it and making it kind of, active in the moment. Yeah. And I think that is one of the major elements of adaptation as well, from book to stage, is trying to bring as many moments or events as possible into the moment. Reported events in novelistic form can be very effective, very powerful, but if that is constantly what happens on stage, we're always wondering why we're not seeing those events. And so a lot of it was moving those events right into the present. And so I suppose there are some scenes that I imagined that were sort of not in the book that I could put into the play because they were in the moment and momentous.
I mean, there are various delayed things in the novel, obviously, which you hope the novel reader is prepared to wait to have explained to them several hundred pages later. Yeah. But which will be hopeless. And I think the thing that the end of Nick's first love affair, which is covered in the book by a jump of 3 years, isn't it? Yes, and you don't really find out what happened at all. But
Yeah.
you had to sort of dramatise that and
Yeah,
make a new turning point out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, that's
Yeah.
very effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that was one of the biggest dramatic changes, wasn't it? Making that into a more of a decision point moment.
Yes, and that's it. That's the sort of structure, architecture that I needed to sort of impose on it, was that rise towards the interval and the sort of midpoint, and then from that point it all being a kind of a slow decline. But that can't just happen by itself. That needs to be motivated by Nick, basically, and by those around him.
And I wanted to ask as well, because I know that when you came to us with one of Rupert and my first questions about it was a little bit about the political moment that we imagined the play was going to be staged in. So we commissioned it, I think, when we were just coming out of a quite long Tory government.
Yeah.
And we knew that we were going into a Labour government and there was going to be a change. And we also, because we were at the beginning of that, didn't know what the culture was going to feel like, what the political moment was going to feel like, and wondered whether it would sit strangely in. You convinced us that that was not a reasonable thing to think. But I'm interested now that we're doing it in 2025, what do you think the resonance of the play is now? And do you think there are different resonances from for audiences seeing the play now to readers reading the book in the early 2000s? Both of you.
I suppose that thing you said about it being 20 years and another 20 years, I think there's some kind of echo through time in that, a relevance to that, which means we're sort of, the events are quite a long time, the events that take place in the play are quite a long time ago now. But I mean, really, I'm fascinated with the 80s as a writer. I've written about it a few times. I think it sort of is the crucible for so much of the world in which we live in now. I think the creation of the hyper individualistic society we have was born there, which has good elements and bad elements, and I think you see that exploding in this play. It's all coming. Through Nick, it all happens. I suppose there's also the general thing of, whenever you're looking back with a piece of drama, you're seeing how far we've come in some areas and how far we haven't in other areas. And I suppose there's an interesting thing happening now with, I guess we're reaching some kind of border of acceptability, certainly in America, for gay rights in particular. There's a sort of unquestion again, and so it's always worth scratching away at that. What do you think?
I noticed quite a few of the reviews have said how timely it is, and it shows how little things have changed. I think someone says in the book, things have changed and they're not going to change back. And this is obviously something one keeps feeling with, particularly with the lurch to the right, which is happening at the moment. Can Trump's America be undone? Can we revert to how we were before? And actually, the changes that happened over the 1980s, social and political changes, were irreversible.
Yeah.
And when the Labour government came in afterwards, it was actually just continuing Thatcherism, more or less, but in many respects by other slightly disguised means. But there was no going back.
Yeah.
I mean, it's historical in a way, but all the themes of greed and prejudice and so on seem to me horribly personal still.
I think the Feddens are a sort of a perfect sort of embodiment of Britain in so many ways, in terms of class, but also in terms of their surface level social tolerance. But you peel back that top layer and there's really strict limits, and that's what Nick finds. And I think that is, we've seen it over the past months and year. It doesn't take much for people's intolerance to be triggered, and this story is a huge exercise in uncovering that.
Great. And I think just before we open up to the audience, I wanted to ask a more general question. From your experience of working on this adaptation, a little bit about the qualities of the novel form and theatre as a form, and what do you think can be done really well on stage and less well in a novel, and vice versa? What do you think really sort of suits the novel and doesn't really work so much on stage to both of you?
Well, I suppose the novel's written in the third person, but it's entirely seen from the point of view of Nick, which was I must say, a tremendous kind of technical challenge. I think that's why there are so many parties in the book, because we need to bring a whole lot of people together, and he can observe them all. But yes, it is very interior necessarily, and so I think, and there's an obvious, a ready sacrifice of interiority but a marvelous actor like Jasper Toll can bring out this interior. So I think it's what you're saying about the taking away, but the actors and the performance actually reinstating the things which have been taken out, because where I might take a paragraph to describe something, an actor can do it in one gesture.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's that other magic of the stage, and it's. I mean, I had the experience also about 20 years ago of this book being filmed for a 3-part BBC adaptation, and there I was confronted with this thing which I hadn't really thought about before, which is the terrifying realism of film. And in a book, the reader just sees what the writer is presenting to them. But in a film, there are 20 people in the background, and they've all got to have something to wear and something to do. And I like the way that in the theatre, that's all stripped out again, and you're focusing on the essence of the drama without all those sort of superfluous distractions. I think that's a rather beautiful and thrilling thing about the theatrical as opposed to the cinematic adaptation.
And I suppose that's also what, Christopher Oram's beautiful design is about, the essence as well. It's it's not incredibly literal. One of the recurring themes and motifs of the book is furniture. How it tells you so much about class and taste, and Nick's father's an antiques dealer, and Pete's an antiques dealer as well, and Nick's always looking at what furniture is in each space, and therefore I think that was, I stated that in the script, that I think it could just be furniture and actors. So that's really what it is, and I think Christopher really honoured that. And so you do have an essence and an essentialism in both the novel and the play. But yeah, you get the excitement. I guess the excitement for me as a huge lover of the book was seeing brilliant actors bring these iconic characters to life that I had imagined, and not only did they fit my expectations of what the characters were in the book, but they actually far exceeded them and gave them nuance and detail that I could never have imagined.
Great. I thought I'd open it up now to see if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask. Yes.
Actually, a question for Jack, which also as an actor and director, I wonder whether it was difficult for you to be the writer and then not to get too involved in the acting and directing, both of which are superb. So the easy answer is you didn't really great, but that kind of goes against human nature a bit. To me, you would be an actor perfectly placed to play Nick. Is it easy just to stay back and let other people do those bits that you also know how to do?
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, of course. It was one of the actors came up to me in rehearsals and sort of grabbed my hands and said, "You're Nick, aren't you?" And I said, "We're all Nick." But we are, we've all been outsiders in worlds that we don't fit in. I suppose that's why I connect with the book so much and wanted to write it so much. Certainly, yes, coming from an actor's point of view, I wanted to make it a joy to perform as well. And I know that the cast are having a tremendous time doing it, which is really pleasing to me. But it was very important for me the undertaking of adapting the whole book was huge, big enough, and you know, I wouldn't have wanted to do both. And I'm a bit too old, love, you know. He has to be young and less jaded than me, and Jasper is that. So,
Thank you. Yes, right over there.
Me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I saw it last night, and I won't give anything away, but I just wanted to ask, you know, what it felt like. You know, as reading a book is generally a silent, solitary experience, but having a play, you've got an audience. Were you ever surprised by how an audience has reacted when you've been here, and disappointed, you know, or whatever? Either way, pleasantly surprised or disappointed?
No, I don't think I was, actually. And I came to the first preview, which is often a shocking experience when there's a particularly solemn moment, the whole house erupts in laughter. So, but that didn't happen, and I felt the audience has been very, well, it's due to the skill of the adaptation and the direction and everything, but I felt the audience has generally been very attuned to it, and there haven't been those dissonances of reaction to what's happening on stage. I agree, of course, it's quite different, and it's a very strange experience for me. I mean, tiny megalomaniac moments. I think if it weren't for me, none of these people would
it's true. It's true.
we wouldn't be here now. But I think it's also something which is quite easy for me to accept, because when I'm writing, I don't see characters physically in much detail. I mean, I think generally, I think with Nick, I just say he's got blue eyes and curly fair hair, and sort of leave it at that. And he's smallish, and I always feel I can sort of see the characters out of the corner of my eye, but not full face, as it were. And I can imagine what it's like when they come into a room or something like that. So they are, in a way, a sort of vacancy which can very easily be inhabited by an actor, and I found that rather thrilling.
Yeah, I think I said to Alan after the first preview, which did go very well, that I said all the good jokes were yours, and I half meant that because they were, but actually I did have to change the rhythm of them to make them work on stage. Because something that's really funny in a book, you can go back and read again and again, and you sort of just make sure you got it right, and then it sort of gets even funnier until you're ready to move on with the story. But in theatre, it's one and done, and if someone coughs over a bit of the joke, it's gone, and then the whole kind of rhythm is out. So making sure those kind of landed, and you only we will do supportive laughter in the rehearsal room, but you really don't know if it's a real joke until you put it in front of an audience. And it was very pleasing. And then there were some surprises, but not no howlers, no mistakes.
Yeah, it is. I think we've had great audiences. I do think it's always exciting on first preview because, like you say, you get so much there's a level of information you just can't get in the rehearsal. You always suddenly get that on first preview, and then you find out so much more about the play, which is really exciting. I'm going to go right at the back there, lady at the back. No, yes, you. Yeah.
When I read the book, I was always fascinated by the title of it because it's a very elusive meaning, and I think it permeates everything in the book, even without being explicitly explored. It is in there everywhere. And you talk about the furniture, you talked about the image in your own mind about the blue eyes and fair hair. But when you move to the stage, you've got, and your adaptation has a lot of emphasis on the word beauty or the line of beauty, and there is a sort of change from the title to the representation on stage. Would that be really interesting, both of you, talking about A, the title, and B, why the greater focus from the book on that theme?
Great. So I think, so the question is about how the title of The Line of Beauty and the representation of beauty has been adapted from the novel to the stage adaptation.
Well, I suppose in terms of the stage adaptation, it's the meaning of the title in the book is dripped across 500 pages quite gradually, and I sort of love the multiple meanings of it and wanted to get them all into the play. So they do, and Nick's obsession with beauty again is something that across 500 pages feels can be explored in its time. In the stage version, I suppose it has to get there much quicker and has to be an active part of his character, because if it's sort of a backseat part of his character, it will never sort of become part of the action. So it actually is, I suppose, yes, I've made it more of a driving force and actually more a central part of what ultimately undoes him. So yes, it's a balancing act, because it can come across as karaoke sometimes, an adaptation of karaoke of the book, the greatest hits. But I think, but again, there's a trade-off, because you get this propulsion in the first half, especially, that sort of you're riding the giddy wave with Nick as he hurtles towards this terrible decision, and then the second half is he reaps what he's sown.
Say no more.
Yeah.
And I think there's maybe also a directorial choice at one point that I think adds to the exploration and beauty, that allows it to sort of reach out beyond the play into the audience.
Which one are you talking about?
I think someone thought I was thinking of a different moment. I was thinking of a monologue that Nick did, sort of in the first half of the play.
Yeah. I think Michael has done a beautiful job of directing it, has to be said, and there are a couple of scenes in particular in the first half that he's beautifully honoured the idea that we, and people as the audience, are Nick as well. As we are in the novel, we're sitting on his shoulder, watching him do it all and make his mistakes. In the first scene, Jasper stands right by this proscenium over here as the scene kind of unfolds in front of him, and we're watching him watching it, and at points he might not as well be there, but that's how he's treated by the Feddens. And then in a later scene, he sits with his back to us, and therefore we literally are again on his shoulder, and that's a beautiful theatrical expression of the third person narrative, because we're just peering over his shoulder at what he's experiencing in a very light touch way.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
I was wondering, when you have such massive projects, how do you know that they're like finished? How do you put an end to it and know that is what you want to present?
That's a good question. How do we know when it's finished?
First shows up, you've run out of time, I think. When did you decide the book was finished?
Oh, I knew when the book was finished, all right, yes.
Yeah.
I can remember writing the last couple of pages very clearly. I was going on holiday the next day, and I thought, I cannot come back. So it was a gorgeous June day. I just lived by Hampstead Heath, and people playing outside and everything. So I closed the curtains. I put in some earplugs. I made a very strong cup of coffee. And I just wrote it very, 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 very fast. It just sort of happened.
Real.
And I knew that was it. Yeah. But that had taken me 4 or 5 years or something to get to that point. You didn't quite have that luxury.
No. Yeah.
As soon as it's a production date is set and everything, you're then caught up and much more inexorably than a novelist is in this time scheme.
Yeah, there are in reality lots of deadlines, not just delivery, but you can't be changing the play. You can't really do any page one rewrites when the actors need to be learning it and things are being designed around it. So there are basic parameters, obviously, but there are dozens of different versions of the stage version of The Line of Beauty. So you kind of at some point have to make peace with the version you've done and sort of let it, yeah.
You're not itching for not directors, but author's cut.
Well, I think I sort of gently pitched to you it could be a sort of 2-part, a 3-hour part 1, 3-hour part 2.
Angels in America.
Yeah, and you said maybe we'll commission you for 1 play, which is the right choice.
Any other questions? Yes.
Actually, I wanted to follow up on that point, and it's a question as much addressed to you, Stephanie. Alan, your novels are at the upper end of length of what is normally novels, and the play, after this process of cutting, is it still too long? And it's ended up in the classic thing of 7:30 to 9:55 to avoid the extra overtime and ensure a decent profit-making interval. So is it the right length? There's been some magical theatre. Stephen Daldry's direction of The Inheritance springs to mind. This was some of the same sort of themes. Two complete plays, and you could see it on an immersive basis or sacred evenings. So I'm just really interested about the length, the positives or not. Is it too short? Is it too long still?
I think it is the right length. I think it's interesting you talk about The Inheritance, which is also, I mean, it's a contemporary play. It does have Howard's End sort of running underneath it, and I think those plays that are based in novels do tend to need a full evening, a kind of worth. And I think, what's always a big thing about length of play is, does it have an interval or not? And obviously, like you say here, there are financial implications. Our bar manager, our finance manager, loves it if we have intervals in our plays. That's not a dramaturgical choice. The dramaturgical choice is that the play needs to be the right length. And I think this is a play of two parts. It has a big interval beat. As you say, you're sort of building rising action up to that moment and then the sort of fallout. And there's quite a lot of balancing in the foot. There's a difference of tone in some ways. Some things that happen in the play are only seeded in quite small ways in the first half and then really come to play in the second half. And I think that sort of mirroring and balancing is quite helpful. Obviously, it's a different experience. Obviously, like you say, reading a novel, 500 pages, you can put it down, get a cup of coffee. Here, we're locking people in a room for 2.5 hours. So it's a different experience and it needs a different kind of dramaturgy and sort of propulsion, which I think you sort of found with it. I tend to think, in my experience, that most of the plays that we have requested cuts from, I felt the play has been better for those cuts being made in general. I think it tends to make the play richer and allows the actors more space to carry subtext, as I said. But yeah.
I think it's such a fine balance, isn't it, really? Because even 5 minutes longer, even if something's brilliant and you think, oh, I could really have done with 5 more minutes of that, it might not be true, actually. It might have diluted everything that had gone before it, and it might have felt flabby, and beats might have felt duplicated, and it's a real balancing act.
And also, I think because there's an amazing scene between Charlie and Jasper near the end of the play, you don't want people worrying about their tray, worrying about the toilet, or sort of getting a little bit bored by that point, because you really want to lean into that scene. I think the sort of dramatic climax, I guess. And I think that's sort of something that you're kind of thinking about. It's like a balance of practicality and storytelling, I think. Any other questions? Up here.
I'm looking forward to seeing the play in 10 days' time. I haven't seen it yet. I'm really wondering, Jack, Alan introduced the subject of the 2006 TV adaptation. I'm wondering what your relationship was to that when setting out on this project. Did you watch it and think, how can I make this different? Did you find yourself inadvertently influenced by it, or did you sort of shut it out and say, no, this has got to be a completely different project, it's got to be something completely
I had watched it several years ago, but I couldn't find it again, even if I wanted to. Now it's for some reason impossible to find.
It's incredibly rare. Yeah.
I have it on DVD.
Oh. Now you tell me. So fortunately I was able to lock it away. But I mean, I don't think watching things like that really does influence you. I mean, I was adapting a huge book anyway. Like that was the collaboration that I was focused on. I think, and actually it would have had limited use because 3 1-hour episodes as I recall, kind of fits more closely with the book's passage of time and division. So I immediately knew that I needed this two-part rise and fall, and therefore it was not actually going to be useful to me. And they are able to keep, more characters, and it's just at its essence something completely different, even though it's the same source material.
Anyone? I'm going to have a look up here now again.
Someone over there?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So, Alan, if there was a writer's cut of this, would there be a scene or a character or a theme that you would prefer to have in which wasn't in the Jack cut? And then, Jack, how would you adapt the swimming pool library? And when will you do it?
So should we do Alan first? Is there anything that you are missing from it?
Well, I just long to bring back Lady Partridge. Who's one of my favourite characters in the book.
Yeah.
But she's just one of the other monsters who suffer.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I was very aware of when I was sort of giving very few notes on the scripts that I read that I didn't want to give novelists notes, because my preoccupations were quite different really from those of the dramatist, and my wanting to kind of rescue something or have the other half of a sentence or something was completely beside the point.
I'd say you actually, once we got into it, you were sort of the opposite. You said, if this character's only sort of doing that little bit,
yeah, well, then let's get rid of it. So yes, I discovered an unexpected ruthlessness.
Yeah, you were quite trigger happy enough. Yeah.
And Jack,
Yeah.
I think you can, if you like, answer how you would adapt this into the library, but also I guess it would be interesting to know, both Alan, if there are other of your works that you feel like you'd really like to see adapted for the stage, and also if there are any books, not just by Alan, sort of are there dream novels that you, or dream kind of works of literature that you
I only want to adapt Hollinghurst. I suppose the swimming pool library has less of an evident theatrical structure. I guess I would love to make a film of that, actually.
Yeah, do the film.
Yeah. Great. All right. Yeah, I'd quite like to see the film of that. Because it's just sort of, it's less plotty, more atmospheric, more characterful, and smaller. So more chance to explore everything that's in it, more richly, more thoroughly. Other books. I am adapting another book, but it's top secret.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but it's so different, and it's a tiny book, which means I'm just going to have to
Expand.
Yeah, so that will be the exact opposite of this, which has been largely subtraction and compaction. Have other of yours been adapted, or
An American producer had a frequently renewed option on the swimming pool library as a play, which I knew from the start was never going to happen,
Right.
and didn't. And I think quite a long time ago, the Donmar were kind of looking into the possibility of it. But the thought of all that kind of carry-on happening in that extremely intimate theatre was that's the rubbish.
yeah, that's another thing that is different on the page and on the stage is the intimacy.
Yes.
And Ben Wright, the intimacy coordinator and movement director, has done a brilliant job of it. It's
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
And yes.
Were you familiar with any of Jack's previous work before you said yes to him? And the bigger question, I suppose, is what makes you say yes when someone approaches you about adapting your work?
Well, it doesn't happen all that much. No, I mean, it's very embarrassing of you to ask that question because I haven't actually confessed that I never saw cruising.
Cruise, yeah.
Yes. I feel an absolute idiot not to.
It was on for a very short time.
But it was, it was a huge success, and so I much regret not having seen it, and I hope you'll do it again. But we had met a couple of times a year or two before, and so I knew Jack, and and I like the idea of a gay writer of not the next several generations on, taking it on and doing their own thing with it. There was something very, very pleasing and touching about that. So, I think I have great confidence in it.
I'm quite interested in that sort of, not the elephant in the room, but there is some generational difference. And in terms of your relationships to the 80s, Alan obviously sort of lived experience of that time, and Jack, I guess your sense of it a bit more through culture and kind of legacy of that time. What do you feel like you brought to that in terms of, I guess, a younger voice?
I suppose it's sort of almost undefinable. I guess I sort of, like, all of Alan's experience and knowledge is in the pages of the book, and therefore in every character. And so I guess I was working with the authentic lived experience and testimony of that time. And I suppose my view on it, or my generational view on it, is certainly is like a curatorial lens through which the play is presented. And so I suppose people from different generations may look at the adaptation and go, oh, well, you've missed I think this is the point of it. But that's, I suppose that's exactly why I chose to focus on my thesis of the piece is that we follow 4 young men through the 80s, and they are differentiated by ethnicity, class, sexuality, and wealth, and therefore their outcomes across the 80s are completely different. And maybe someone from a different generation would have kept in Lady Partridge, so I suppose I focused on the younger generation, and I suppose that's how it played out.
It goes back to what we were saying at the beginning about the thing being done for a new, what are the resonances, what are the similarities, and so on. And the fact that, most of the young members in the cast, of course, were born long after Mrs. Thatcher had left the stage.
Yeah.
So, and for them, it is excavating something historical, and there is, I suppose, also something kind of educational about retelling the story. I mean, like the Russell T Davies, It's a Sermon, and so forth. These are, I think, quite valuable, just in a kind of social way, of reminding people and repeating these stories which otherwise might be forgotten or simply not known to the younger generation.
Yeah. I suppose, yes, even in a line that Badger has, which is, someone asks how he turns 50 million into 100 million, and he says, I don't, it turns itself. And that's not the economic condition now. So it's sort of young people watching go, there was a time when that happened.
So I definitely should have worn a watch, but I think we probably maybe have time for like one more question. So yes.
Yes, hi. I sort of have a question as follow-up question to the very first one. And so it has to do with Jack as coming from an acting background and then adapting this novel. So tossing the age swap out the window, if you were to play Nick, what do you think your version would be like? And also, Sal, you mentioned the beautiful performance that the acted by one gesture that encapsulated in several paragraphs nuances. If you were playing Nick, which is your creation, how did you think you might sort of introduce the character on stage?
Great. So the question is, if you magically, both of you, were cast as Nick in this production, how would you interpret that role?
I'd have to have quite a lot of hair dye.
Sort of
Yes, I have to have some work done.
Or I guess maybe also what you feel Jasper brings as well to the part in performance.
I think Jasper's amazing. I think he brings such openness and such to sort of be a rock in the heart of this whirlwind of the first half, and then an emotional torment of the second half. takes incredible skill and confidence. I suppose I don't necessarily think I'd have that skill and stillness and confidence. I think I'd probably be a bit of a wetter Nick, and I don't know. He's just sort of an incredible purity, and I don't think I have that.
No, nor I. I might play Badger, actually.
Yeah, he'd be a good Badger, yeah.
So I thought I might close just by asking, having been through this process and this collaboration, do you have any advice for other writers or theatre makers, either if they're having their work adapted, maybe their novels adapted for the stage, or adapting? Is there anything, any sort of key lessons that you've learned that you have taken out of this process from both of your perspectives?
Well, for me, having no sort of skill as a theatre writer at all, I've never even thought of writing a play, because what I like doing above all is describing things, just the one thing you can't do. I think that, yes, I felt the wise thing to do, to me, the natural and easy thing to do was not to surrender interest in it, but to hand it confidently to people who knew what they were doing and could perform this magical transformation.
Do you think it would have been harder with a more recent book?
No, I don't think so. I think the same feelings would obtain, really.
And what was the question?
Do you have any sort of advice for people adapting and then going forward?
Well, Russell T Davis, who was in the other night and who's a mentor, said that it's really easy to adapt a terrible book because you don't care. You can take liberties left, right, and centre. It's really hard to adapt a book you love. And once I'd pitched it to you and you'd said yes, then it really dawned on me that I was going to have to butcher my favourite book. And it's brutal and bloody and
great fun.
And great fun as well, yeah. It becomes fun again, yeah. And then yeah, it's a real roller coaster, and it's but it's not for the faint-hearted, I think. Yeah, but it's a very involved and a process with highs and lows. So I suppose the advice is brace yourself.
Thank you so much for talking to us, and thank you very much for all of your interest.